Oh my god, hey! Welcome back to my Stagey YouTube channel. If you are meeting me for the first time, hello! My name is Mickey Joe and I am obsessed with all things theatre, and this is my theatre-themed YouTube channel where I talk about the shows that I have been invited to go and see as an independent theatre critic based here in the UK. And today I'm going to be talking to you all about My Fair Lady. I was invited to go and see the touring production of My Fair Lady. This is the revival that started life at Lincoln Centre, directed by Bartlett Sher. It then transferred over to London, to the West End, where it played the Coliseum Theatre, and is now touring across the country. And I was invited by the lovely team at the Southampton Mayflower, which was very exciting, because that's the theatre that I grew up visiting, and it's a lovely, beautiful auditorium that I've been meaning to get back to for years now, for a very long time. So I was thrilled that the stars aligned and I managed to go and see My Fair Lady in one of my most beloved theatres of all time, the Southampton Mayflower. So in today's video, I'm going to be bringing you my full review of that production. I reviewed the same production before when it was at the Coliseum here on my channel. You can go and watch that video. It was a little while ago. And I think I ended up giving it just about a 4-star review. My feelings on the show have shifted slightly. Certain things about it feel different or play differently now that there is a different cast in place. Perhaps there were some issues before that are now fixed. Perhaps there are some new little thoughts that I have. I will let you know all of those in today's review video, but you will have to keep watching to find out if I liked the show more or less on tour compared with London. Is there anything else I need to say? Normally I have more of a disclaimer than this. Oh, I'm wearing this jumper a lot recently, but it has like cute little embroidered flowers on the sleeves and My Fair Lady. So flowers, floral aesthetics. It had to be done. It had to be done. If you do enjoy today's video, make sure to subscribe to my channel. I post new review videos all the time, as well as a lot of other theatre themed content. And if you want to be one of the first people to hear my thoughts about a show, I have started a new series called First Impressions for my YouTube members. So it's £2.99 to join as a member of my YouTube channel. The link is in the description of this video, and every show that I see I try and make a first impressions video where I film my reaction immediately after the show, or sometimes in the interval, or sometimes before, letting you know what I'm anticipating about a show with whoever I'm at the theatre with. So if you would like to be able to see those, make sure you become one of my YouTube members. Now, let's talk about My Fair Lady. Oh, that was dreadful. That was really bad. Here is my review. Governor. So this remains for me a 4-star production. I just did 8, didn't I? That's far too many stars. 4. Only 4. This remains for me a 4-star production of the show, but it is a stronger 4-star production of the show. It's not teetering on that boundary between a 3 or a 4. It's lovely and it's charming. So I will say that a few of the complaints I had in London made a little bit more sense for this touring production, because the set was a slightly puzzling one. For the set of the production when it was at the Coliseum, I said they either had far too much set or not nearly enough, because we had Henry Higgins' massive house that rotated around and had multiple floors and so much furniture, and that looked great. But then you went outside to the street immediately outside his house, and there was a single solitary doorway, like just the one door, and then I think 2 trees, perhaps a lamppost, if we're being generous. But you even have a comedy moment where Freddie Eynsford-Hill asks which house it is, which door he's looking for, and the policeman turned to the only existing door on the street. That was a little comical. And things like the races, where you just have a single cloth that becomes a tent, come down and sort of slowly and painstakingly turn and then open while people are wearing these gorgeous, detailed, ornate costumes, and you don't have the same level of detail in the set. The backdrops, the watercolour backdrops are lovely, but it was oddly inconsistent, the set, that we would have such a full set and then such a sparse set for different scenes, for things like the Embassy Ball, for things like the introductory scene even. Now, on tour, they retain all of the same set pieces, so it makes sense that this was a set that was built to tour. Now, having sat a little bit closer, I start to have a few issues with 1 or 2 of the set pieces. Henry Higgins' house, for example. I loved this set piece in the West End, except for the fact that they have to step off of it occasionally, where they go right up to the edge, or where she throws the slippers and they go off the stage, or to walk around the sofa, someone has to step off of his house. And because it's this big rotating set piece that rolls in, there's a decent lip off of the house. It's about that high off the floor, so people are stepping off of that and then stepping back onto it. And every time they have to step off of it, it just feels like, oh, you've left the world, you're not in the show, and then they come back, and it's an odd one. It's an odd one, but I don't think they could have made it any bigger and fit it into all of the venues that they are visiting, not if they want to have it spin around as well. The bookcases, and I know I'm a nightmare for picking up on this, but the bookcases on the first floor of Henry Higgins' home are just painted on. And I have seen plenty of good Amdram Society make a detailed looking bookcase by taking like spines of books and sticking them onto something so it looks three-dimensional. Like, I'm thinking of that wall at the National Theatre Bookshop. If you haven't been, there's a whole rows and rows of scripts, and then this one wall that is clearly a door to, I was going to say backstage. I'm so theatrical. Gosh. The offices of the National Theatre Bookshop, but it's made to look like books, and it has like three-dimensional spines, and that's what I wanted for the first floor of Henry Higgins' office, because I was still sat in something like row P of the stalls. I was not very close. I mean, closer than I was in the Colosseum, because everyone is a mile away from the stage at the London Colosseum, but that bothered me. And also the pub scene that opens out to become a theatre when Alfred P. Doolittle is doing I'm Getting Married in the Morning. Again, the frontage of that just looked very flat. I wanted it to look a little bit more three-dimensional. I like the way that they had painted the flats that came down to be the introductory scene, and I wish the frontage of the pub had had the same kind of depth to it. I'm nitpicking, but generally the set made a little bit more sense for it being a touring production. The other thing that I thought was much better, actually, for this than it was in town was the sound. So this was what I heard a lot from people when they saw it in the West End, was that the sound was an issue. And they have this lush orchestra. They have the same orchestra on tour. It's lovely. It's a beautiful sound that they create. It's exactly the kind of classic sound that you want something like My Fair Lady to have, and I'm glad they have not, from what I can tell, that is downsized the band, and they're not running it with the bare minimum, which so often is what we are hearing these days in shows. You know, we could talk about Phantom downsizing their band because they can get away with it, but I love that they haven't done that here with My Fair Lady. It sounds classic, it sounds rich, but in the Colosseum Theatre it's very hard to balance the sound, and people weren't getting a consistently good sound quality, especially in different areas of the auditorium. I thought the sound was wonderful in the stalls at the Southampton Mayflower, and that seemed to be the location where people were complaining the most in the Colosseum. I feel like it was people in the stalls who were saying they struggled the most with the sound. So that was much better. The sound seemed to be much better. They still do this wonderful sound moment where you're hearing the horses run all the way around the auditorium. It's this surround sound moment, while the ensemble are sort of vacantly just watching them go around with very little expression. I'm glad that they've retained that, and it's gone from being a show riddled with complaints about its sound to a show that we left saying, oh my gosh, the sound design specifically was excellent. So it's great to see something really turn around like that. The rest of the differences between the West End and the touring production of this show were down to the casting. So let's talk about the touring cast. So the wonderful Charlotte Kennedy is now playing Eliza Doolittle. Charlotte, from what I remember, was the second cover for this production when it was in town. She's a former cassette from Les Miserables. She is a wonderful young soprano, and I loved her Eliza. I thought she was incandescent with charm, I believe is what I said on Twitter. She was just so endearing, and she has that duality of Eliza Doolittle down perfectly. She had all of the feistiness and landing all these comedy moments with no awareness of the fact that Eliza is being funny, because Eliza is not really cognizant of what's going on for a good initial portion of the show. And then this lovely shift in the second act where she is still willful but in a different way, and she is sort of owning her choices and biting back at Henry Higgins. It's a lovely characterization. She's just so charming, even if she is screaming for a good 10 minutes at the beginning of the show. She sings beautifully. I will say there is less of a pronounced shift. Like, she still obviously changes in terms of pronunciation from the Cockney at the beginning to then the posh, but her transformation did seem to be the tiniest bit more gradual. Sometimes it's such a sudden shift and it's not necessarily completely believable when you have Eliza's going, "Ow, it's too hard, Professor Higgins. The rain in Spain stays mainly in the plain." But I really bought into her transformation moment, which I don't think is something I've ever really picked up on before. So kudos to her for playing that in a very convincing way. There was this slightly lingering thing with some of her vowel shaping, where I would describe it, if she was pronouncing a word, I would describe it as sounding a little bit sharp in her pronunciation. Obviously in music that means something completely different, but just the way some of her ah was still coming out and her ah, and her oh was a little bit ah, just, I think some of the height of it perhaps almost still had this slightly twangy quality that was a little bit reminiscent of her accent at the beginning of the show. And I don't know if that's the worst thing in the world, but it wasn't necessarily fully Julie Andrews, oh, rounded, I could have danced all night. There was this slightly sort of twangy quality, just a very, very subtle one. I will say that Charlotte's is probably the funniest Eliza Doolittle that I have seen. She really landed those comedy moments. And I was profoundly moved by her speech to Henry Higgins in the second act when she told him how she had felt about him during this whole time. I don't remember that being quite as stirring in the Colosseum version of the show, but it's a very long show and a lot of things have happened by that point. So who knows if I'm just misremembering. So Michael Xavier was playing Professor Higgins, and Michael Xavier is an incredibly capable musical theatre leading man. His are excellent hands to entrust this role into, and I have gone on record, I don't think I liked Henry Higgins in this production in the West End, not because of the actor, he was very capably played, but he is just a bit of an irredeemable misogynistic douche at times, isn't he? Like, I get that it's a dated story, I accept that it was a different time, but it's very difficult to get on board with him in this production because he never really comes to terms with his own shortcomings, he never understands the situation from anyone's perspective other than his own, and Michael Xavier managed to circumnavigate that. Henry Higgins, per the text and per this direction of the show that affords Eliza a little bit more agency, he is still a misogynist, and he is still obnoxious and pretentious and self-involved, but Michael Xavier really lent into him also being incredibly juvenile and childish, and that allowed us to laugh at him, especially in the second act as we see Eliza becoming more forceful and more powerful. We start to take him less seriously, and because we're taking him less seriously, it allows us to perhaps despise him a little bit less. I found it easier to just laugh him off and still enjoy his performance than I did in the West End because he was silly. The other excellent thing about Michael Xavier playing this role is that he is such a talented vocalist, and there has been a long history of Henry Higginses who aren't necessarily vocalists, who are strong actors, because you can navigate Henry Higgins parts of this score without having to be a very talented vocalist, shall I say. Rex Harrison famously is sort of the good name of speak singing in musical theatre. Why can't a woman be more like a man? And Michael Xavier is absolutely not going to do that. He's still characterizing it, and it is not like full grand Michael Xavier Sunset Boulevard vocals, but the way that he delivers these songs is still informed by his inherent musicality. So in particular, with the song I'm an Ordinary Man, he has so much fun building these refrains when he's singing this lovely lilting verse, and then it goes into his hysterical "but let a woman in your life" choruses, and it builds and builds and builds every time he delivers it, and he gets as hysterical as I was hoping he would. It's hilarious, and he's showing you from early on that Henry Higgins is not to be taken entirely seriously. He is a man who even early on in the show is prone to these hysterical rants. And then we also get a lovely and stirring performance of I've Grown Accustomed to Her Face, which perhaps does not normally get sung to such an extent. So that was very lovely as well. That was a treat. So I do have some thoughts on the supporting cast members as well. Adam Woodyatt was playing Alfred P. Doolittle. Now, I think the biggest struggle for me with the West End production was Stephen K. Amos as Alfred P. Doolittle. Just none of the humour was landing, the charm wasn't landing, he just didn't work for me in that role. He didn't feel comfortable with the material, there was no sense that he was enjoying it whatsoever either. Adam Woodyatt feels a little more comfortable with it, and he has this charm, and in particular his scene towards the end where he's resentful of the station to which Henry Higgins has inadvertently elevated him by referring him to an American correspondent and saying that he was one of the great British moralists. That's a really funny scene, and Adam Woodyatt plays on his irritation with the situation that then follows very well. It's still not gut-bustingly hilarious, and I do still think that there are musical theatre actors who could deliver something more substantial with this role, someone like a Gary Wilmot type, for example, but at the very least, it is not dying a death every time we get to the Alfred P. Doolittle scenes in the same way that I felt that it was in the West End. So the tone and the pacing are more consistent in this one, which is good. Lesley Garrett is playing Mrs. Pierce. She's fabulous. She's brilliant. The acting is wonderful because she doesn't get to sing much. I'm baffled by the fact that they have Lesley Garrett touring the country with My Fair Lady, and she doesn't have the opportunity to sing much. She has this one line that she milks like a dairy farmer. She gets to say, "I understand, dear, it's all been grand, dear, but now it's time for bed," or something to that effect, and she delivers it with the most reverence and back phrasing. It becomes, "I understand, dear, it's all been..." And, like, if you're there to see Lesley Garrett, you want her to have some kind of a moment because she's a phenomenal operatic vocalist. But it's odd to me that she is in such a small singing role. But she's wonderful. She's excellent as Mrs. Pierce. I half wondered if when they toured this production, they were going to attempt to have one actress play both Mrs. Pierce and Mrs. Higgins, because I feel like that track would feasibly work within the show. The two do not cross paths to my knowledge. There might be some quick changes involved, but that felt like a cost-effective way to have a star who could play both of those roles, playing both of those roles. But evidently they decided not to, because Heather Jackson is playing Mrs. Higgins. She does a lovely job. She's slightly more robust than when I saw Vanessa Redgrave in town, understandably. And she's funny and she's sassy and she delivers what I want from that character. John Middleton is playing Colonel Pickering. I really enjoy him in this production. I enjoy Colonel Pickering as a character. I think in this version of the show particularly, he's positioned very well to be the one that you enjoy more, in contrast with Henry Higgins. But John does an excellent job. He's endearing and he's passionate and so believably of the time. He really finds that historical tone very well. And lastly, the supporting cast is completed by Tom Liggins. He is playing Freddie Eynsford Hill. I believe he may have understudied this role in the West End because he was definitely in the production when it was at the Coliseum. He sings On the Street Where You Live very nicely. He gives you the slightly awkward Freddie moments leading up to it, and then subsequently. This production very much pushes Freddie to one side in terms of a legitimate romantic option for Eliza. He's not taken particularly seriously, and I will say Alex Parker, who was conducting, who is phenomenal, and I enjoy very much, but On the Street Where You Live, he was beating that very quickly, by which I mean conducting. That was done at a heck of a pace, I thought. Perhaps I just love that song and I have a lot of fondness for it, and I'd love to hear it. I have often walked, it became I have often walked down this street before, but the pavement always... It was almost an up-tempo. Like, it was decidedly fast. It was nearly a megamix. I'm exaggerating slightly, but it was fast. Maybe it's because Lesley Garrett took so much time over her solo line. Maybe we had a train to catch. Also have another music note, and I haven't done enough of a deep dive to know whether this is always the case, but it bothers me when we do a lovely back phrase on I Only Know in the song I Could Have Danced All Night, but I don't know why that happens on the first two choruses and then it doesn't happen on the third. So first chorus she sings I only know when he began to dance with me. She does it again on the next one, and then we get to the third one. She's there by herself. She's building towards this big finish. The house is rolling backwards. She's about to sing a very high note. Everyone's about to applaud. We love this song. And she goes, I only know when he... And there's a sense of pace and purpose with that, but I think it would be better to do that version on the first two choruses, and then when we get to the last one, I heard a dance, my heart took flight, pause. I only know, towards the big finale. I don't know why they do it the other way around. Someone can answer me that question. Have they always done it that way? I'll listen after I record this. Arguably, I should have researched that first, but it's just, it bothers me. It bothers me. So the highlight moment of the show. I think when I saw this in town, I was so struck by how much I loved Amara as Eliza Doolittle, and I think probably more than I enjoyed everyone in the rest of the cast. I think she really stood out as such a star amongst her peers to me, that I said Eliza's material was my favourite parts of the show. And it's fair to say, I think, based on the audience reaction, the song Get Me to the Church on Time went over really well. That was very much appreciated in the audience that I was in. People know the song, it has more of a sort of a tap your foot along quality amongst the audience, and it provides something very needed in My Fair Lady, because it is a long show. The first act is 90 minutes. There are so many moments where you think we're going to go to an interval, and then we don't. The fact that we keep going after the rain in Spain surprises me every single time, and then I could have danced all night, and then we are still going. It's a long show. It's a very long show. And if you've ever been involved with an amateur version, you will know that the ensemble are hysterically underused. They have very little to do within the show, and it's missing those rousing company number moments. I think the whole scene at the races I really enjoy. That could be a standout scene of the show. I love the dancing in the beginning of the second act at the Embassy Ball. But in particular, you feel it when we have the song Get Me to the Church on Time. It's this big rousing company number, there's dancing, there's set pieces, and it just has an energy that is lacking for much of the rest of the show. So based on the rest of the audience, that was probably the most winning moment of the show. With a really great musical theatre actor leading it, I think it could be an even better moment. For me personally, I feel like my favourite moment was probably still Charlotte Kennedy singing I Could Have Danced All Night. Or Wouldn't It Be Lovely? I was really noticing details in the staging of that I hadn't necessarily picked up on before. So maybe that one was my favourite as well. So this is just such an easy recommendation to anyone who loves classic musicals, because it does feel to me like classic musical done beautifully and charmingly. Yes, the sets could be a little fuller at times, but the performances are all cohesive, there's charm, there's a little bit more believable romance. I can almost root for the romance at the core of the show. The ending is still very odd. I'm still not entirely sure what the ending is meant to represent, because it was one thing in the Colosseum when she could walk off of the stage and through the audience and really leave the entirety of the set and the story, but now she just sort of returns to Henry Higgins' home and walks off and then leaves via the wings. I'm not sure what it's meant to represent. So by all means, comment down below with what you think that was meant to mean. I know people have strong opinions about this ending. Some people think that it ruins the show. I think it's meant to afford her a certain amount more agency. I'm not sure whether it represents that she's leaving or she's staying because she's just come back and then she sees him. Is she even really there? Is he just imagining her? What do we take from this ending? But in any case, I think this is perfect vintage musical theatre. I think the older generation perhaps, and it was largely the older generation who were in the audience when I saw this the other day for a matinee performance, I think they will delight in this. It's just lovely and sincere, and so if that is your vibe, head to a touring venue near you to go and see My Fair Lady. But those have been my thoughts about this touring production of the show. If you have been lucky enough to see it already, let me know your thoughts in the comments section down below. How do you feel about these new cast members? Which moment in the show was your favourite? And what do you think the ending means? Thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you have enjoyed. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my Stagey YouTube channel for plenty more content coming very soon, including more reviews of upcoming shows, both in the West End and on tour. I am all over the place at the moment. Also, like I said at the beginning, if you want to be one of the first people to hear my thoughts about every show I see, not just the ones that I review with longer videos here on YouTube, make sure you sign up using the link in the description of this video to become a member. For just £2.99 a month, you get access to all of the exclusive content that I post here on YouTube. I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you have a stagey day. For 10 more seconds, I'm Mickey Joe Theatre. Oh my god, hey. Thanks for watching, have a stagey day. Subscribe!